So thank you, and Rich, thanks for coming out.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Rich Feldman, and I'm really glad to be here. I want to thank the organizers, both from Troy, who have been doing the monthly Iraq moratorium, as well as SDS. And what I want to talk about, why I'm speaking, is I was involved in 1967 to 1970 in Ann Arbor at SDS. So they said, let's go find some old guy who's been involved in SDS. So a little younger than my previous speaker, maybe about a week or so. But what I want to talk about is, and what we did in Ann Arbor SDS, and you've heard all the stories, or you'll read the stories, or you've seen the films, right? We stopped military recruiters, we took all of our ROTC buildings, we had a lot of militant demonstrations and all those kind of things that were just referred to. But it was all about how do we change our vision for society, how do we create a vision for society, how do we change ourselves. This is the 40th, today, 2008, it's the 40th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King. I want to hold that for a minute because I think there's many things that we need to learn from the last few years of Martin Luther King's writings. 1968 was also the Democratic Convention, where people who were active in peace movements went to the Democratic Convention, and there was a police riot, and it was a radical, you were there? I was there, and it radicalized a whole generation to say that will be the last time we work within the system to change it. They were the McCarthy campaign, they were working for Robert Kennedy for peace. Presently, I moved to Detroit in 1970 with 35 other people from SDS to make a commitment and continue our commitment to political work in Detroit. We worked in the plants. I spent 30 years at a Ford Motor Company plant where I was an active unionist. And I do a lot of community work, presently work with the Detroit City of Hope campaign, which is a gathering of large numbers of community groups that are transforming from the grassroots, from urban gardens to peace security organizations, to urban housing, to how do we create community in our city again. But what I want to emphasize, because everybody talks about SDS and we talk about demonstrations, and we think if we go out today and we demonstrate and there was 100 more people, the war would end. Or if there was just 500 more people, the war would end. It's not about how many people come out for demonstrations. And the reason we're stuck on that is because your vision of SDS is the latter period of SDS. It's the 1967, 68, 69, 70 period. It's the 72 period. It was the militant period of SDS. But if we go back, there were two stages to both the civil rights movement and the SDS movement. The first movement in the civil rights movement was the Montgomery bus boycott. That was a campaign for 381 days of the people coming together to desegregate the buses, right? That's where Martin Luther King becomes famous. But it was a whole transformational process that took place. SDS, when it started and wrote the Port Huron Statement, was about creating a whole new society. And people went to the South, they went to the cities, they worked day to day in community organizations. They were creating the beloved community, and they were creating new forms of democracy, whether it was a civil rights movement or it was SDS. It's only after the assassination of Martin Luther King, it's only after the Chicago 68 and Columbia 68 that it transforms into talking about power, of how we're going to get power, how we're going to win the revolution. What we forgot and what we left behind were the questions that Martin Luther King was raising when he talked about the need for a radical revolution in values and the need to fight racism, materialism, and militarism. And he was talking about creating the beloved community. He was talking about transforming ourselves and our whole society. And I say that because being an anti-war movement is not good enough for all of us. How do we create a peace movement? It's very different. And where I want to go very quickly, because I'm here to talk about the war, is I'd like folks to, how many folks have seen, so I think the first thing we have to ask is, how is the world different from 40 years ago? What's similar and what's different? I'm not going to answer that question. But I'm going to ask how many folks saw the Obama YouTube? Yes, we can YouTube. How many people have seen it? Okay, only about 20% in here. Okay, 3.5 million people are watching that YouTube because there's a new generation being hit by saying there's a new change that's possible. Not that he's going to make all the change by himself, but he's creating a discussion in this country that we need to be listening to. While I might have given my money to Kucinich and supported Edwards on certain questions, it's not the issues and policies or demonstrations that make change, it's fundamental transformation of values. It's not about proving a theory of revolution from the past, as much as I love every moment I was in SDS. It's about creating a revolutionary theory for the future, out of what the work that we do today. I'd like everyone to, I want to go back to the war, but I want to say which war are we talking about? We're in Wayne State, we're in the middle of Detroit. So I'd like folks to stand up for a minute. Everybody stand, and folks in the back have to come forward. This isn't like, this is participatory democracy, right? But you're all back there as though you're like, just like watching TV. Come on up. Everybody come up. I spend a lot of time in plants, and I know I got about 3 minutes. I was just in a plant in Highland Park where they make chrome bumpers. I walked up to a guy, African-American guy, and said, "What do you think about the Obama campaign?" And he said, "I don't vote. I don't get involved in politics." I said, "Oh, you're a Jehovah's Witness." Well, that's okay. I said, and then he said, quote, "I have 12 children and 28 grandchildren, and they're all alive." I want you to think about that. He's defined his life by the fact that his children and grandchildren are alive, right? A very fundamental question that people face every day outside this university. We all know that 3,960 GIs have been killed. Some of their names are Matthew Strotter, David Schultz, Michael Norman, Gary Jeffries. We all know the statistics. We all know the statistics, 25,000 are wounded, 100,000 are going to need mental support. We know that 4 million Iraqis are displaced. Anywhere from 200,000 to 1 million have been killed because directly from the war in Iraq. Their names, Nabil al-Awasasi, Salim Mohammed, Abis Ali, 10-year-old male in Iraq was killed. Christmas Eve, Allah Yassan was killed in Iraq. In Detroit, police have been charged with killing 7 to 9 people in 2007 in Detroit. One is Artrell Dickerson, killed by Detroit police. Warren police killed a young man named Chan Buri Jong, a Hmong student who was 18 years old. They shot him 27 times in his bed in Warren. War is about violence. War is about transforming our concept of violence and our concept of militarism. It's not about a policy in Iraq or just the imperialist wars. It's about transforming something from inside. The names, 11-year-old Darren Johnson of Oak Park, 13-year-old Orlando Heron of Detroit, Southwest Detroit, a young 13-year-old Christian Sanchez Slater were killed. So we can go from vets, GIs, Iraqis, Detroiters. That's what this war is about. The theme for this march. And we look around and say, well, where are all the folks from Detroit? Well, we're doing it in Wayne State. Well, part of it is because we haven't put together the concepts that say we have to stop the war in Iraq and we have to stop the war on Mac. We have to find a way to create an anti-war movement that encompasses all the struggles that people are going through, all the fears they're going through. I was just at a very brief meeting in Southwest Detroit, in our own city, right? 100 people in 1 week were picked up because they were undocumented and didn't have licenses, driver's licenses. Hello, Nazi Germany? People have read about it. They're picking people up on the street because they don't have driver's licenses, because they're not legal immigrants. We can't have peace if we're silent to the immigration crisis going on. So it's about, and if you were abolitionists, we want to learn from history, and if you were an abolitionist, you would be fighting, you would be engaged in protesting the Fugitive Slave Act. But when they pick up folks in Southwest Detroit, that's what's going on. So we can't separate the realities of Detroit from the suburbs or from the realities of the war internationally. All of you are very committed individuals. All I ask is that when you think about war and you think about your involvements, you ask questions that we're facing today, that are being raised every day, much grander than the war. It's about how do we create a new society, citizens for peace. How do we become local citizens as well as global citizens? That's one lesson from Martin Luther King, become global citizens and local citizens. Thank you.